When the clients come to our agency, they run into a lot of situations, and unfortunately, we cannot help everybody due to, a lot of reasons, criminal background, or due to the fact that it's nothing. I mean, it's by the law, it's nothing we can do for them right now. What we usually do is the client come to the agency, and what the Catholic Charities does is inform them, their we give it like a consultation, and whatever is their situation, their situation, we tell them we can proceed with the case or we cannot, proceed to the case, and we tell them about how much is the fees, how long it's going to take. Even that is kind of hard because, it's what I say, it depends on, every case is a different has a different criteria. So, and we start with the client from, the beginning to the end, or, the process, if it's something that, we can do for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Stacy, I just wanted to ask you maybe to expand a little bit on your previous comments. I think one thing people maybe in the U.S. or who are born citizens are maybe misinformed about or maybe don't know, when people come in as immigrants and they're not citizens, they have, you say, those sort of rights of citizens, they're the same rights as everyone else except for holding federal office, voting, things like that. Can you talk a little bit about what responsibilities immigrants have that are the same as U.S. citizens, taxes, things like that?
Well, immigrants are still required to pay taxes like U.S. citizens. They have, in our view, they still have the responsibilities as citizens and being good members of the community and so forth.
Yeah. All right, David, I thought we'd maybe talk about this a little bit in historical perspective as well. Can you give us maybe an overview of what the process has been like in the past, or how easy it's been for people to become citizens or not? A broad question. Yeah.
One thing's for sure, the citizenship laws have changed over the years, and it depends on a lot of different factors. One of the first factors, really in the 19th century, was race. Race combined with what the economy is like, and workers, and labor unions, and issues of employment. In 1882, the United States instigated its first, basically, immigration restrictions. That was the Asian Exclusion Act, or the Chinese Exclusion Act. Basically prevented laborers from coming over from China, contracted laborers, to work on the railroad. And a lot of white and black workers that were already in America didn't like that idea because they thought it was taking jobs and driving down the value of their labor. Things went on. In 1920, the state of California prevented Japanese from even owning land. 1921, 1924, the National Origin Acts limited the amount of immigration according to the census of 1890, which is interesting because the census of 1890, basically in 1890, the United States was much more of a country based on white Anglo-Saxon population. It was after that you started having a lot more Catholics and Eastern Europeans and Hispanics come in. So the immigration laws that we've had traditionally been based largely upon race. Nowadays, and especially after the Civil Rights Movement within the United States, people refrain from talking about it in those sorts of ways. Ideologies become big. During the Cold War in 1952, there was actually ideological restrictions placed. So if you're a communist, you cannot immigrate to the United States and you cannot become a citizen. And by the 1970s or so, 1965 actually was a major immigration act that was passed. And it basically got rid of the racial restrictions and quotas that used to typify United States immigration law. And instead it just put caps on how many came from the Western and Eastern Hemisphere. So Eastern Hemisphere, let's say, Asia and Europe would have about 170,000 people that can immigrate. Western Hemisphere, Latin America, for instance, Canada, it would be 120,000. And the loophole to that was families, and as was mentioned before, once you become a citizen, then you can get your families in. So many different people take advantage of that, and were able to get in over that cap set in 1965. And since then, we've had a number of laws passed in the 80s, 90s. Most recently, 90 what's interesting in the 1990 laws is that some of the immigration laws are couched as welfare reform acts. For instance, with the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, it actually stated that immigrants are not able to get food stamps, something that citizens can, but immigrants can't, even if they're paying taxes, etc. And illegal immigrants basically give up all the social services except for emergency medical care. So it's interesting. So originally, let's say 100 years ago, race was right out there when it came to immigration laws and who can immigrate and who can actually get citizenship and what their rights would be. But since the 1950s or so, since World War II, it's been couched more and more in ideological terms and in terms of what benefits do we give citizens.
Okay. And sort of dovetailing with that, Luz and Stacy, maybe both of you could talk a little bit about the basic process that someone goes through to become naturalized.
In most cases, a person, in order to be eligible for naturalization, has to be a permanent resident for 5 years. There are some exceptions to that I will talk about later. But they have to be a permanent resident for 5 years. They have to be a person of good moral character. They have to be able to read, write, and speak English, and be able to pass a history and government test. And they have to be physically present in the United States for half of that 5-year period. For example, of the 60 months, they have to be physically present for at least 30 of the months, with none of those absences exceeding 6 months in order to be eligible for that. The exceptions to that is if you're married to a U.S. citizen, you have to be a permanent resident for 3 years, married to the U.S. citizen for 3 years, and that your spouse has to be a U.S. citizen for 3 years. And the physical presence is then half of that 3-year period, 18 of the 36 months. And part of the process would be to first file the N-400 application. After the application is filed along with the fee, a person could expect to get a fingerprint notice a short time later to go to one of our application support centers. And after they're fingerprinted, in many of the offices now, you'll be interviewed probably within 4 months of actual filing. Actually, no, between 4 and 6 months, say, from the filing date. And that also depends on the office. In Chicago, we're at about 4 to 6 months, and I would expect that Indianapolis would be the same. As long as you pass the test and all of the requirements are met, and then you'll be scheduled for a naturalization ceremony a short time later. There is a lot of information on our website about how to become a U.S. citizen. A lot of information that's available on our at www.uscis.gov, and you can also download the form there. And when the person goes to an application support center, they can get this brochure on to help prepare them for the government and history test. It's called Learn About the United States. It's a quick civics lesson, and it includes a CD, or actually, it's a CD that you can play that will ask the questions so that you can learn about the history and government.
For this process, does somebody have to, before they come into the country, say, I'm coming into the country and I plan on becoming naturalized someday? Or can you be here as a student for a couple of years and then decide that you want to initiate this process?
Well,
or
you can't go from being a student in a student status to a citizen status. A student status is a non-immigrant status.
Oh, okay.
It's just a temporary status. You have to be a permanent resident here in order to go forward with the naturalization process. A student here could be then petitioned for by an employer and become a permanent resident through that petition, but then we'll have to wait the 5 years after becoming a permanent resident to become a citizen.
So then the form that you'd mentioned before is one that you apply to become a permanent resident before you apply for...
The form that I mentioned is the N-400. That's the application for naturalization.
Oh, okay.
There are other forms that need to be completed in order to get permanent resident status, and those depend on whether or not you're being petitioned for by an employer or by a relative.
Okay.
And there's a lot of information about those forms and what they're used for also on our website.
Could you maybe tell us what the difference is between, and I'm just going to put quote marks around this because I'm not sure I really like the terminology, between somebody who's an illegal immigrant and somebody who's a legal immigrant?
Right. Well,
like how is that defined, and how do you decide?
An illegal immigrant would be somebody who is in the United States and does not have a status. They may have entered without being inspected by an immigration officer and admitted into the United States, or they may have entered the United States with a valid temporary visa and have been given permission to stay for a period of 3 or 6 months and have overstayed that period.
Okay.
At that point, they become an illegal immigrant.
Okay.
An illegal immigrant would be somebody who is either in valid status
Yeah.
or has a permanent resident card.
Okay. I guess I was going to actually, and all my questions now are for Stacy. Are there still restrictions or any kind of, I mean, what you might call quota systems that aren't really quotas? Are there regions of the world that there are more people that, as David alluded to in the past, you had the sort of Eastern, Western Hemisphere thing? Is that still?
There are
True at
certain
all?
countries that what they say are oversubscribed, and those countries are Mexico, India, the Philippines, and China. There's restrictions on those countries because of the number of immigrants that we have already admitted from those countries. All the other countries are included in other, and they have the same chance of immigrating as
Okay.
anyone else.
Are there any countries that have sort of special status, like Sudan or anything, where immigrants or people are fleeing a political situation?
That's a
or-
little bit different because those people would be either claiming refugee status abroad or coming here and claiming asylee status. And then after that, after a period of time being in asylee status or after entering as a refugee, they would then be eligible to become a permanent resident.
Okay. Luz, do you have anything to add about the process of becoming naturalized?
Well, what Stacy was saying about a good moral character, this is one of the problems that we have, that our clients get into, is it's a lot of people that they want to apply for citizenship, but the fact that they have, criminal issues, and it doesn't matter. I have clients that they have, and I have a situation with a client when they come, they come to my office and you ask them, in all the ways that you can imagine, if they have been they have been having any trouble with the U.S. police, if they have, any records, they always say no. They always say no. And some of them, they really believe that they don't have, anything wrong in the records. And I have a situation with a client that he was kind of getting upset with me because he said I have never had any, problem with the U.S. With the police. And, well, it's my job to believe the client. I mean, I'm not going to question it. You are a criminal if they are not. But this guy was a really nice guy, really good father, and, it was nothing wrong with him. But it was like 20 years ago. He was charged because he had a gun without permission. And it came up when, we applied for citizenship. And now this guy he was put into removing proceeding. So this is the situation. You have to be really careful when when the client apply for citizenship because, believe me, U.S. Department of Homeland Security is looking really careful and, that the people really have a good moral character. And I have clients that they have, DUIs. It depends, of the DUIs or the situations, but they have to show that they haven't, if it was a DUI that he committed maybe like 2 years ago, that's going to affect, his or her petition. So this is the situation that we get more into, unfortunately. Mm-hmm.
Is that the most typical thing then, a run-in with the U.S. police, or do they ever look into people's criminal records in their home country or things like that, or does that ever come up? Or
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Occasionally it does.
Occasionally it does. Mm-hmm. They look. Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times lawyers who defend people who have criminal problems sometimes will give some advice like, if you just accept court supervision, it's not going to count on your record.
Mm-hmm.
However, under immigration law, it does count.
Mm-hmm.
It's an admission of guilt.
So, okay. Are there any other things that are sort of good moral character issues? Any other, like, political affiliations, or I
There
was
is
just wondering.
political affiliations and also failure of a parent to pay court-ordered child support. That could be an issue. Those are some of the major things. Paying taxes. They all kind of fall into that good moral character.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Domestic battery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's another one. It is pretty common. And people, especially people coming from another countries, it's about, I think it's a cultural thing. They came to this country, they don't know the rules. They think that they can just, they can drink and they can drive, because this is pretty normal, back in their countries. They don't know. It's just, it takes some time for them to learn to adjust to the new culture, and especially in talking about refugees, that they are in refugee camps for so many years. They came here, and it's like everything is new. We have in our Catholic Charities, we have the resettlement, program. So with the refugees camp, we are supposed, to put them in the apartments to teach them, about the the situation, how is the culture in the United States. But it's really hard, the way that they can even, it's just a cultural issue.
Are there other services, say in Fort Wayne, for people who are in this situation? I mean, it seems like it must be overwhelming the adjustments and learning the ropes and all the red tape. So it's Catholic Charities.
Catholic Charities, and I know there is other organizations. I think the Africa community, they have a good organization, and they help each other. It's the same with the Burmese. Most of you know that we have the biggest Burmese community in the United States here in Fort Wayne. So, and I know they're pretty close, and they're trying to help each other. And church, they collaborate and.
And then, Luce and Stacy, I'll ask you another question sort of on this theme. I guess we've touched on this a little bit. Do you have any sense of what the biggest stumbling blocks are for people typically? You mentioned this good moral character issue is often a problem for a variety of reasons. Are there any other things maybe that people should be aware of?
One of the things that's becoming more of a problem at our office is the ability to read, write, and speak English. And I think it's becoming more prevalent because just a few years ago, between filing the application to the interview, it was 2 years plus, and now it's down to 4 months. And so people used to have that 2-year period that they were counting on to prepare for the test, and they're still counting on a long period of time. But because we've reduced our backlogs, they're getting their interview much sooner. And so when they come to the interview, they're not prepared. So it's kind of it works against them in a way.
Right.
For a time, they didn't like the fact that it took so long to become a citizen, because after they were eligible, it would be another 2 years before they got an interview. But now that we've reduced our backlogs, sometimes they're not prepared enough.
I guess I'm surprised that that it's become a quicker process. That's it. I mean, that's very interesting. I wonder what. I don't know if you would have an answer to that. I'm just wondering, why, how it's just become more efficient. Is it?
It's become more efficient. We've also have gotten an increase in staff in order to deal with the backlogs. There's been a sort of initiative to reduce the backlog to 6 months, and actually, as of last week, the Chicago office has met its goal, and so we are now at 6-month processing time.
Okay.
It has been wonderful because believe me, it has, because some of the adjustment of stars that I just did in July, some of my clients, I already got the interview. I'm talking about in Indiana and Indianapolis. So it has been just a couple months. That's good. That's pretty good.
One of the another problem that people are running up against is what we call the FBI name check, and there's a name check that has to be initiated when any application is filed, and we have to wait for the FBI to give us the go-ahead in order to naturalize that person. And so some people are stuck in that for a long period of time, but it's really out of our agency's hands. We need to wait for that background check in order to make sure that they have the good moral character that's required.
And let's see, David, I wonder if you could give us a little bit more historical perspective on some of this as well. And I know one thing I'm curious about is the fluctuation maybe in immigration law over time, when it's been easier or when it's been harder to become a citizen.
Well, it was easy It was really easy up until 1891, unless you were Chinese. In that case, it was, 1882 is the year. It's interesting to hear. It's 5 years you need to basically, be in the United States. In 1790s, it went from 2 years you have to be here in 1790 to somewhere in the mid-90s, 5 years, and then 1798 they passed a law which said you needed to be around for 14 years.
Was that the Alien and Sedition Act?
That was the Alien
Yeah.
Sedition Act, yeah, and it was mainly done for because war was brewing, war was going on in Europe, and they just didn't want radicals coming into the United States, and so they would manipulate the immigration law for those reasons. But for most of the 19th century, if you can get here, you just walk off the boat and you can basically start living and then apply for citizenship later on. But 1891, interesting year, 1891. Through the Department of Treasury, believe it or not, the embryonic INS was established. I'm not sure, I don't remember what the name of the organization was at the time, but it was an organization which started to create these standards for what it took then to actually legally immigrate here. And a lot of them seem like using the same terminology. Moral character. Someone had to be of good moral character. They weren't supposed to be a criminal, they weren't supposed to be an anarchist, they weren't supposed to be a prostitute, anyone like that. That would get you, sent back. Health, tuberculosis, leading killer in the 19th century. If you were not deemed healthy, if you had tuberculosis, often you're put in quarantine until something cleared up. You could not be a pauper, which is interesting because if someone had money, they probably wouldn't be coming to the United States at that time. But if you're completely indigent, there's a chance that they would prevent you from coming in. This was set up in 1891, and of course that was a subjective call largely by whatever officer was interviewing them. Oh, you also had to be of sound mind. So if they thought you were a lunatic or not quite, of the mental character,
imbecile or something.
Imbecile or whatnot. Yeah, they
Use
would.
that terminology.
Like an imbecile or whatever terminology that they wanted to give you. Yeah, you could be prevented from entering as well. What else? 1921, when they had the big Immigration Act, and it was later. They put more teeth into it a couple of years later in 1924. That's when a lot of the bureaucracy started. So you're talking about all these forms that people needed to fill out, et cetera. That really was the 1920s that started to happen. Forms, people started to do quotas for nations, et cetera. So that's when the INS was officially established, was in 1921. And otherwise, it's just been more or less the same, it sounds like, but with slight tweakings every decade or so.
Can you maybe tell us, too, a little bit? I mean, it seems that in recent decades that there have been some areas in the U.S. that have had substantial population growth from immigrant communities, and then that, of course, spurs certain backlashes. Is this something that we saw in the past? Is that
Oh,
something-
yeah. Totally. Let's say that you can transport back to 1870. You go to places in Wisconsin, the local newspaper is going to be in German, right? You go up to places in Minnesota, and they're going to be in Swedish or Finnish. There would actually be these agents that would be in Europe. And after the Homestead Act, it was established in 1862, you'd have agents in Europe that would basically encourage entire communities of Germans, of Swedes, people with skills, for people with farming skills and blacksmiths to uproot entire towns, essentially, get on ships, pay for passage over, and once they arrive, they'll be met by an outfitter that would help them get out west. So cities like Chicago grew within 2 generations. Their population went from a little over 100,000 to well over 1 million to being the second most populous city by 1900 in the United States. That was fueled by immigrants that were going to Chicago, Lithuanians, Poles, I mean, you name it. Chicago had both political parties and the newspapers, and would be in multiple different languages. As a matter of fact, Hull House, the settlement house movement, which started in Chicago, they would actually have English language courses to help try to, encourage new immigrants to learn English. It was, especially out west, entire communities were based largely on the immigrant experience. And on the east, of course, you have the city of Boston and the Irish. They gave Boston, its character still exists today. I mean, St. Patrick's Day in Boston is probably the biggest holiday around. So, yeah, immigrants definitely have left their mark on cities. The interesting thing is that where there's the most nativist backlash, and what I mean by nativist backlash is anti-immigrant sentiment, is not so much in the cities with a lot of immigrants, because the immigrants then basically control the culture and prevent the backlash because they are the majority. It's in the cities where you have the smaller number of immigrants and where immigrants are politically disenfranchised. And, in the 19th century, there were big political machines like Tammany Hall that would take advantage of the immigrant vote. So the immigrants actually would be able to use the political system to achieve positions in the police departments, fire departments, civil services. So, yeah, I mean, the story of America really is the story of immigrants.
Yeah. Well, before I open the floor to questions, did everybody get out what they, is there anything else we should be mentioning before we open the floor for questions? I know I did want to point out the website, right? www.uscis.gov, right? Which has forms, information, downloadable applications. Okay.
There's one more thing I want to just say. We've been talking about immigrants coming from outside the borders into the United States. In the 19th century, there was, at least in the 1880s, the biggest question, once they decided Chinese are no longer to be immigrants, can no longer immigrate, the biggest question is what to do with Native Americans. I mean, the Dawes Act, 1887. The idea was transform these Native Americans into U.S. citizens, and they did it by all these ways, like basically partitioning off reservation land, trying to give private ownership of land to individual Indian families. So that's another element of the story, which probably is not as relevant today as it was in the 19th century. But yeah, you can't really talk about naturalization and American citizenship,
That's a good point.
the history of it, without also recognizing Native Americans were part of these groups that the federal government had to deal with and tried to deal with.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Why don't we go ahead and open the floor for questions? Yes, Andy?
I'm intrigued by the subjectivity that David mentioned, and actually both Stacy and Luce as well. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how, from a provider perspective, CIS tries to limit that as much as possible or make it as official as possible. And then from Catholic Charities' perspective, how often do you see a lot of flow or ebb and flow or fluctuation in those terms like good moral character?
Well, the term good moral character is subjective, and basically we take a look at a person's criminal record, and we'll know their criminal record because part of the process is to go for fingerprinting. And anytime someone's arrested, of course, their fingerprints are taken and transmitted to the FBI. And so if they do have a criminal record, we're going to know about it. And some crimes are not going to affect, or convictions for some crimes are not going to affect a person's eligibility, but others are. It depends on what the crime is, how often they've been arrested, what their sentence was. There's a lot of different factors that go into making a determination of good moral character. I'll give you one example. If it's one DUI within the 5-year period, we will most likely be approving that case. But if a person has 2 or more, it sort of shows a pattern of criminal activity, and therefore we would be more likely to deny the case. If a person has a misdemeanor retail theft conviction within the statutory period, we would be more likely to grant it. But if they have that along with something else, we would be leaning towards denying it. So we're looking for more or less a pattern and not just a one-time, bad judgment.
Yeah, as I said, this is the difficult, situation for our clients. And when the client come to my office and, even if they want to apply for citizenship, because isn't the citizenship process with immigration, just look more careful, because if it's for legal permanent residence, there is always ways that we can waive, some crimes, as Stacey said. And this has been one of the issues, because if the client came with the criminal record and we see that is, so many things that is impossible to waive, or they were going to put in risk our client, we'd rather, refer the client to, an immigration a private attorney or, somebody else, because we know that we are going to put, the client in risk, and we don't want to start a fight with U.S. Department of Homeland Security, because it's, so that's why we just send the client to someone else, or we just tell the client, no, this is not the time for you, to apply for citizenship, or you can never apply for citizenship, because there is certain crimes that immigration doesn't forgive. I mean, they're there forever. Mm-hmm.
Are there other parts of the process that are as subjective as this concept of good moral character, or is everything else relatively straightforward other than that?
I would think it's relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
There was a time way back when, years ago, when the officers would be able to ask any question that they wanted on the subject of history and government, but now we have 96 standardized questions that they can choose from, or 98 standardized questions that the officers can use, and that's it. So before, it used to, that part of the process used to be a little bit more subjective, but it's more defined now. What Liz was saying about crimes, though, there are some crimes that, as she said, we will not forgive, like a murder conviction or an aggravated felony. A UUW, just a simple UUW, is a problem, and it's not under the good moral character part. It's more under the removability part of the law.
I'm sorry, what's a UUW?
Oh, I'm sorry, unlawful use of a weapon.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. Maybe one or both of you can help answer. I know in the 1950s, ideology was one of the issues that someone would have to go through. I don't know if that would fall under ideology, its own category, or good moral character. I know today with the war on terror, even scholars from Muslim countries are having trouble coming to the United States to give lectures. There was a celebrated case a few years ago that I think is still being worked out. Where does that fall now? If someone comes from a Muslim country and let's say that they are a cleric, let's say, is there a new category? Is there a new review process for religion now?
No. They're one of the things that has come after 9/11 is this FBI name check process, and that is so that the FBI can check their investigative records and see if this person is a known terrorist or associated with known terrorists. And other things, too. It doesn't just focus on the terrorist issue. It focuses on money laundering, anything that the FBI would investigate.
Yes.
One thing, Stacy, that you said that really caught my attention was those that are here on student visa can't apply.
They can apply for residency. They can't go directly from being a student to being a citizen. If you're here as a student, you're in a non-immigrant status. Legally, you're here, but you're in a non-immigrant status. In order to become a citizen, you would first have to become a permanent resident. And the ways of doing that are either to be petitioned by a employer, or by an alien relative, or something I didn't mention before, which is the diversity visa program, which is run by the Department of State.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. The diversity visa program is mainly targeted towards countries that are seen as being underrepresented in the United States. If you're interested in immigrating, you would put an application in with the Department of State. You have to have at least a high school diploma or equivalent. And if your number is chosen, you win, and you get to come here.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm currently trying to get my daughter the N400 completed and sent in. I went on the website, printed it off. I've had questions in regard to some of the information they need. I've called the hotline, got various opinions. Then the guide, the M476, I used or tried to use, and there's an M77 within that. There's a document checklist, and right now, evidently, the M476 is being updated, and I try to get answers through the telephone, and I could not get.
Okay. Probably for case-specific cases, we can talk after the panel. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Okay.
Other questions? Yes.
Could somebody comment on the bills that are being proposed in Congress at this time? You know, exactly, like the one, I think it was, I forget who sponsored it, but what is, I guess I don't understand what the debate is there. Are they trying to limit the number of people coming in? Are they trying to, you know, ask for more, you know, for people trying to come in to be able to complete more tests and fill out more forms? Or can somebody comment on those?
Do you want to take that?
Last I heard is that all that was dead. But I don't know what
Yeah,
the situation is.
I know that there's a lot of proposals, but I don't think there's anything specific that's gone through. So I would really rather not speculate on that.
Also, when you say they have to be able to, did you say speak English also?
Yes.
Read, write, speak? At what kind of, you know, do they have to master the English language or just be able to?
No, it's
Is that kind of subjective also?
it's subjective, but it's about at the third grade level.
Sorry?
About at the third grade level.
Okay.
And there are some exceptions. Some people who are applying for naturalization are not required to meet those educational requirements because of age and their time here as a resident. For example, if you're 50 years of age and you've been a permanent resident for 20 years, in that case you would not have to pass the English test portion of the test, but you would have to pass the government test in your own language. And there's also provisions for people who are unable to pass the test because of medical disabilities. In that case, if the form is completed properly by the physician and their diagnosis is very clear and we can clearly understand why the person is unable to learn English and the other information that's necessary, the test would be waived. You're welcome.
I do know. I wanted to mention too that the booklet that's given to all immigrants coming into
Right,
the country at the airport is printed in what, 8 languages?
It's
Is that
printed
right?
in eight language.
Yeah,
8 languages.
8 languages. So obviously not the well, many more languages being spoken. I know, but I mean there is some effort, I guess, being made to facilitate for people.
And there, I just wanted to comment too. While there is a lot of information out there on on our internet site about how to apply for certain benefits and so forth, there are some cases where you're going to actually want to talk to an information officer, and so you can go to our website, and on the right-hand side of the home page, there's a button you can click that says InfoPass, and you can go on to the InfoPass page and make an appointment in any of the INS offices, and it's available in I think 12 languages. So you can pick the language that you would like to use to make the appointment, and you would indicate also what your inquiry is regarding, and you will be able to pick the date and the time to come in for your appointment, and print out an appointment notice that you can show when you come for the appointment. So you're guaranteed to be seen by an information officer on that day.
And then would you be seen by an information officer who speaks the language then that you're?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
In most cases, usually if it's in Chicago at least, if you speak Spanish or Polish or maybe Chinese, we can usually accommodate you with our employees. But other than that, you would certainly want to bring a translator.
Okay. Yes.
I'm wondering if anybody can, perhaps David, follow up on her first question of, I don't know how long ago, 4 or 6 months ago, all of the discussion that's happening in Congress and with the President. And obviously, no bills were put forth. Were any proposals discussed, or did the political rhetoric just stop at the rhetoric? And what was the purpose of it?
I don't know the details of the bills. I think that there is a lot of talk, and there was a preemptive move of immigrant groups to stave that off. So, yeah, I don't feel like I can tell in any detail.
No.
Address that question. There were two bills proposed. The first bill was proposed by Congressman
Sorry, there was sense
No,
of
right.
Yes.
Was to, first of all, build more fences, send more troops, hire more border officials, okay, and to enforce the immigration law before anything else was passed. That's his bill. The Senate bill said, no, we first also want to include a workers program, bringing workers in.
Oh, that's right.
For 5 years, let them work for 5 years, pay their taxes, and then maybe citizenship down the road, maybe. That was the second bill. So right now, that was with the stalemate here. These guys said, no, let's enforce the law first of all, and then we'll give you a workers program. These guys said, no, give us the workers program, and then we'll enforce the law. So right now, there's another bill being proposed now, that we're gonna build 7,000 miles worth of border, and when it's left, we'll put it on the northern border, okay? And then we'll talk about a workers program. Because since that, nothing's happening right now, since we're still a stalemate, we're stuck in the position of, what do we do? CIS is stuck in that position. So we're still granting the benefits, we're still doing work as usual, work as it is. And if you hear anything out there, we're not going to amnesty, we have a workers program, it doesn't exist. When something happens, Stacy and I will be back here yelling and screaming for Chicago, and you'll hear us in the what place, go out and apply for the benefits. Because we're hearing a lot of frauds going on, and I'm sure Bruce is aware of it, I'm sure you're aware of it also. A lot of fraud goes on in our communities. Whether it be a Hispanic community, whether it be Asian, whatever, it takes place because people hear this word, the amnesty and workers program, and you go out there and you hear, the first thing you do, you go apply for these benefits that may not exist. So if you answer the question, there are two proposals out there. Enforce the law, build more fences, hire more National Guard, get rid of the Minutemen, okay, and I'll take away the workers program. But neither one they're still at a stalemate. Hopefully something will change. They're saying maybe November, which we don't know, there's an election coming up, so we're still waiting to see how that turns out. But as of now, hold your horses.
Yeah.
I do have
Indeed.
a question, Phil. You mentioned, Stacy, that people can go to the website, they can get an interview with staff at CIS, but that would probably be pretty intimidating to some people. How does Catholic Charities or organizations like Catholic Charities sort of mediate that? How do you build the relationship that people start to trust you enough that then they will trust and feel confident in going to see someone from CIS?
Well, what we do is the clients already, they know Catholic Charities through the churches, through the friends, Besides, we have our, refugee resettlement program, and we have all those refugees who come to, for Wayne, eventually are going to be, they are clients of Catholic Charities, they come through us, but eventually they're going to be, my clients. So Catholic Charities is really trusted, for the community. So that's why for whatever little thing they need to know about immigration, they always come to our agency. And yeah, for some of our clients, they even that it's really easy to get, an InfoPass appointment. It's really easy. You go to the internet and it's there. But for some of our clients, they don't have any access to internet. They don't even know a computer. So it's just too much for them. They just come, and sometimes they have so many questions that they have to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to go to immigration. We just tell them, they sometimes they don't really need to go there because it's in Indianapolis and it's always, it's 2 hours drive. Just too much for them. So they just come to our agency, and they always have to schedule an appointment because now I have another person, it's part-time, but I was only me, until last week, and everybody has, to come and schedule an appointment, and I just, if it's, questions, and we just answer the question. I have been trained. I got Catholic Charities is recognized by the Board of Immigration Appeals, but I have my accreditation by the Board of Immigration Appeals, and I had to be, trained all the time. I belong to Catholic Charities, belongs to Catholic Legal Immigration Immigration Network. We belong to Notre Dame Immigration Clinic. It's a lot of, I get trained, and so I can advise the clients. And
Are there any other accredited folks in the Fort Wayne, Allen County area?
No, we don't have any other agencies in Fort Wayne. We're the only one.
Okay.
Is there any place closer than like Toledo, or, I mean, I don't see, Fort Wayne's a pretty big city here, why isn't there a CIS here? Or Toledo, or, I mean, can you go to Lansing, or, I mean, there's closer places, you know? Is this
Yeah, well,
regionally based, or?
they're based around, the larger cities, of course. The Chicago district includes Milwaukee, Illinois, and Indiana, and we only have three offices. We have our main district office in Chicago, and then a sub-office in Milwaukee and a sub-office in Indianapolis. I know for the Chicago district office, I don't know if Indianapolis has this sort of program, but for our citizenship program, we send officers periodically to other areas, such as Rockford, Illinois, Springfield, Peoria, other larger cities around the Chicagoland area, to do interviews there, and we also have oath ceremonies there. But I'm not sure if Indianapolis has a similar.
Yeah, for
program.
the ceremonies, yeah, we have, I think it's a couple in Fort Wayne.
Goshen.
Goshen, South Bend. Yeah. Do they have the service too? But only for the ceremonies if you want to become a U.S. citizen.
One of the interesting things here is that immigration used to be something that happened strictly in Chicago, New York, San Francisco, in some major metropolitan areas. And over the last several decades, we've seen an increase in the number of entryways becoming, where you find, for example, Atlanta is now an entryway. A lot of other cities are becoming entryways. And unfortunately, as a political scientist and former government employee, I feel I can say this, government sometimes a little slow to catch up with the way things are working. And the case here, this is just a wonderful example of it. Because if you look at the number of gateway cities, including Austin, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, they are all over the country now, where it used to be literally just around the border of the country, and now they are everywhere. And so CIS just unfortunately is not one of those departments that gets a lot of funding, and so hasn't been able to grow the way it needed to. But you've heard that Chicago and Indianapolis have now managed to cut down their backlog, but they're still, it's a long, slow
Well,
process.
she made the point that, the people, it's a 2-hour drive, and they don't want to do it, and it's not happening.
Oh, if they had to, believe me.
Yeah, and this
They
is-
do,
this
they
is the
go.
sort of issue people feel passionate about. What they really should be doing is talking to people who are running for Congress, who are running for Senate, because they're the ones who allocate the money that opens up an office in a Toledo or a Fort Wayne or someplace else.
How often would client typically have to physically go to CIS in this process?
If we're talking, go on.
Or either of you, yeah.
It depends on the process. Because if somebody who wants to apply for a legal permanent resident for just his or her status is like they had to go for the fingerprints. You have to, everybody has to be fingerprinted. The second one that will be the interview. It's just 2 times,
Yeah.
2-3 times.
Okay.
And for the citizenship process, it would be for the fingerprinting, for the interview, and then for the oath ceremony. And there were times before where people would be scheduled for fingerprints, but then not be scheduled for an interview until, say, 2 years later. In that case, they would have to be re-fingerprinted because the clearance is only valid for 15 months, so then a person would have to be re-fingerprinted. So minimum is 3 for naturalization.
Other questions?
I have one other question. On the alien registration card, it's a 10-year limit now. 30 years ago, it was like, forever, but you registered every year. But now with the 10-year expiration, that 10-year can come and go and you don't even realize it because you don't really use that card for anything else.
Well, your
There's
status.
no reminder set or anything?
No, just for clarification, the card will give you an expiration date, but that doesn't mean that your status will expire on that date. It means that the validity of the card would expire on that date. So you would continue to be a permanent resident, but would need to get the card updated just like you would for when your driver's license expires.
Yeah, and you can't apply for naturalization without a current card.
Actually, if your card is expired, you still can apply for citizenship.
That's the answer I just got, and I just paid the money for a new one.
Your status, from my point of view, you still have the status as, a person would still have a status as a permanent resident even though their card expired. So they would therefore still be eligible to apply for naturalization.
The thing is too, since 9/11, 2001, we had an incident took place, and we're in a war. And because of that incident, the other requirements for these green cards, that you have to carry now, have gone back into place. It's a law. It's always been a law. You have to have your card with you at all times in your possession. And it's got to be valid. Because if you don't have the card, me as an official immigration, if I ask you for your card, you don't have it, I can fine you $500 for not having that card with you. So you know, before people would have those cards, put them away, and leave them there. But now it's required by law. You have to have the card with you, and it has to be in status, a valid card now. Why? Because of 9/11. And
There's a-
and
yeah.
all these changes are taking place now. Also, there's something called a change of address. If you move from Fort Wayne to Goshen, or Goshen to Fort Wayne, or across the street from your neighborhood, you've got 10 days in which to notify us that you moved, if you're a legal permanent resident. And that's a requirement by law now. Before it was always there, but we just never did it. But now because of all this homeland security, as we're calling it, we've got to do it now. And everybody's being put on that nickel, as they say, and you've got to follow the law.
Yeah, but is that more of an honor system type of thing?
Well, sir, we ask you to do it. And because sometimes we go for apply for citizenship, they can ask you, did you move? Yes. How come they didn't tell us? They're not out of the box. The officer wants to use that kind of discretion and deny you citizenship. It's happening in some cities already. Not in our area, thank God, but in some cities already.
And the
But either report to change of address.
And that form is called an AR-11 for information.
I have a question, kind of a related question. What are the substantial differences between the INS and the CIS? Is it just a change in name, or is it actually a change in mission, policy, the way you go about doing things, too?
After 9/11, when Department of Homeland Security was formed, the INS was split into 3 different components. Our component is basically immigration benefits. It's immigration, the Citizenship and Immigration Services focuses on immigration benefits and whether or not a person is eligible or not. The other 2 components are more enforcement related. They both merge with sections of Customs. ICE is the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, and then the other agency is Customs and Border Protection, and they're the people that you see at the airport and at the land borders and so forth, and Border Patrol officers.
Yes.
I have a question back to the naturalization process. By being a U.S. but once you are a U.S. citizen, who can you bring into the United States? I know some people can bring their spouse, or they can apply for their parents or stuff like that. Where does the limit end, or how do you go about doing that? Or can you tell me a little bit about the process?
A U.S. citizen can apply for many relatives. There's differences in the way you apply and the waiting times. For U.S. citizens, immediate relatives are those visa numbers are immediately available, and immediate relatives are considered to be spouses, parents, and unmarried minor children of that U.S. citizen. A U.S. citizen can also apply for their married brothers and sisters, their married children, their unmarried children who are over the age of 21, and brothers and sisters. But those categories, there are wait times in order to get the visa. So a U.S. citizen would file the I-130, which is the petition for alien relative, in order to hold their spot in line. And then it could be a number of years before that relative could immigrate here.
From cases that you guys have seen, maybe those you can tell us. Is there
You can go on the Department of State's website, and I think it's www.
I just like
There's
visa
a-
bulletin. That's
yeah,
what
there's
I
a
always
visa bulletin.
like, visa bulletin, and it just came up.
There's a link on our website to the State Department visa bulletin. It's issued, updated every month. There's some categories where there's I think there's up to a 20-year wait for some categories, 10 or 20. But it varies from country, and it varies to category.
No,
alien permanent resident?
An alien permanent resident?
To become a legal permanent resident? Well, in order for you to become a legal permanent resident, first of all, you have to be in a legal status here. What Stacy was saying before, the students, if you come in as a student and you want to marry a U.S. citizen, you can start the process, for legal permanent resident. And what you need to do is just to file, all the paperwork that you need to, and it wouldn't take more. In the state of Indiana, it's not taking more than from 3 to 6 months. But you need to be in a legal status in the United States, or you need to be in a legal status, or you need to have being in the country have come to United States with a visa. I have a lot of clients that they came 10 years ago, but they came legally to the United States, and even if they overstay, they marry a U.S. citizen, they can just still adjust their status. If you are undocumented, if you didn't come with any permission at all, there's no way you can, adjust your status here in the United States. You need to go back to your country and try to do the process, what we call overseas, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. And or if you have a petition filed before April 30th, 2001, that's when, I don't know if maybe Stacy can tell us a little bit more about the law, is when the Congress, they just cancel the 245A law that, allow undocumented to adjust their status here. The only thing that they need to do was paying a bond, and that was it. But that was, the government is done with that. We don't have it anymore. So you need to either be here with a visa, even if you came, years ago, or you need to be in any status, a visitor, as a student, as some J1.
The citizenship process is much easier, much less complicated to understand. When it comes to becoming a legal permanent resident, the process gets very complicated, and it's much easier to talk about case-specific information in determining whether or not someone's eligible. As she said, there's so many things that are factored into whether or not a person can adjust their status to that of a permanent resident.
I have a question, Stacy. If